Safety, this Congress. We're here to talk today about the critical role that immigrant healthcare professionals play in our nation's healthcare system and the opportunity and, frankly, the obligation we have to confront our nation's growing shortage of healthcare workers. I want to thank all of our witnesses who are here today, both in person, and we have one witness participating virtually, who will speak about their personal experiences and our shared goal of improving care for millions of Americans. For that same reason, I want to thank Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Cornyn, who will be joining us momentarily, and all the committee staff who have worked so hard to organize today's hearing. Today, we'll shed light on solutions to the challenges facing our healthcare system. Solutions, frankly, that can save lives. And we have a chance to improve our immigration laws in ways that better serve the needs of our population and our economy. Americans facing obstacles to access to the standard of health care they deserve is nothing new, but in recent years, it has become even harder. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States was experiencing some concerning trends. Our population was aging, with an increasing demand for care while retirements by physicians continued to rise. Daunting student loan debts were discouraging prospective healthcare professionals from entering the field. And hundreds of hospitals in rural or low-income communities were at risk of closing after struggling to recruit or retain physicians. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic created an entirely new strain on our workforce, thrusting America's healthcare workers onto the front lines of a once-in-a-century global health pandemic and accelerating burnout in an already fractured system. Tragically, since the beginning of the pandemic to November 2021, so this was almost a year ago, at least 4,547 healthcare workers, including 458 nurses, have died while caring for their patients. As a result, we're now facing an even more dangerous shortage of healthcare workers. The Association of American Medical Colleges projects the U.S. is facing a shortage of up to 124,000 physicians by the year 2034. That means a shortage of up to 48,000 primary care physicians and more than 77,000 non-primary care physicians. In addition, an estimated 1 million nurses are expected to retire in the next decade. For over 2.5 years of the pandemic, Americans had to put doctor's appointments and life-saving screenings on hold. But as COVID becomes endemic, and as we learn to better manage outbreaks, Americans should not be forced to further delay life-saving care because we failed to invest in and grow our healthcare workforce. We have to protect our healthcare workers and ensure they're able to work reasonable hours, have better staffing ratios, and that they're paid adequately and have the equipment needed to keep them safe. Now, I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of the National Nursing Shortage Reform and Patient Advocacy Act. But that alone won't be enough to bridge our entire healthcare workforce gap. The good news is there are some common sense solutions right before us. There are thousands of highly capable healthcare professionals living abroad with the desire to come to America to study, train in their profession, and work, saving lives. We know immigrant healthcare workers can help to fill the healthcare workforce gap and provide critical care because in communities throughout the United States, they're already there. They're already doing it. 1 in every 4 physicians in the United States is an immigrant. And 1 in every 6 nurses is an immigrant. Among them, there are approximately 34,000 DACA recipients and 11,600 TPS holders working in healthcare. And with an aging population in increasing need of care, immigrants make up over half of our physicians practicing geriatric medicine. And nearly 38% of America's home health aides. So think about this. Immigrant doctors write prescriptions. Immigrant nurses care for us at our bedsides. Immigrant healthcare professionals perform highly skilled procedures each and every day. And they're often the cornerstone for rural and low-income communities, places where a single foreign-born physician can be tasked with treating an entire community. They can, and they want to, be part of the solution to our healthcare workforce crisis. However, even as we face unprecedented shortages in our healthcare system, the laws that limit the immigration of highly trained healthcare workers have gone largely unchanged since the 1990s. There continues to be significant backlogs in processing green cards for critical healthcare workers. There are annual caps to employment-based visa categories that have not been met, and per-country caps that should be updated to meet the demand of today's healthcare industry. And many of the federally recognized essential workers that we relied on at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic still risk uncertainty with their legal status in America. In our hour of need, the United States is effectively discouraging potential healthcare workers from trying to come to and work in the United States. That needs to change. The very first bill I introduced in the Senate, co-sponsored by Chairman Durbin and other members of this committee, would start to protect many of those workers at risk by providing a pathway to citizenship for over 5 million essential workers without permanent status. The Citizenship for Essential Workers Act would protect healthcare workers who risk their lives to keep our communities safe during the pandemic. I'm also calling on the Senate to pass the America's Children Act and protect documented dreamers, the children of long-term visa holders who face deportation at the age of 21 without a green card or other immigration status. Many healthcare professionals worry about their own children aging out of status or losing status completely if something were to happen to the primary visa holder. And as we'll hear today, what we need are system-wide reforms that incentivize and welcome immigrants into our healthcare workforce. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today about their experiences and their ideas for fixing this broken system. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Cornyn for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoy working with you on these issues. But as we've discussed in private, it's hard for us to make progress on areas even where there's consensus on the topic of immigration while the border is on fire. Last year alone, 108,000 Americans died of drug overdoses, and almost all that comes across the southwestern border. 71,000 of those 108,000 were overdosed on synthetic opioids like fentanyl, the precursors of which, of course, come from Asia and then are manufactured in Mexico. Come across the border because the Border Patrol is overwhelmed by the volume of humanity coming across, which is, of course, part of the plan, part of the business model of the drug cartels. Overwhelm the Border Patrol. They're busy taking care of unaccompanied children and other migrants in a humane way, as we would want them to do. But in the meantime, it takes Border Patrol off of the border where the drugs come across. And of course, there are serious concerns, as there should be, about crime in America. And the truth is that most of these drugs are distributed by a network of gangs operating in all of our major cities and even in some of the rural parts of our country, and who are largely responsible for much of the gun violence you see in places like Chicago and elsewhere as they fight for market share and for territory. So for at least now a year and a half during the course of the Biden administration, Our Democratic colleagues have been in the majority. The chairman of this committee has a unilateral prerogative to mark up any bills that he wants. But as I have told him in private, trying to work in good faith with him and the chairman of the subcommittee, I can't imagine a path forward until we find some way to deal with the crisis at the border, which is basically a policy problem because of the way that asylum cases are treated. As long as catch and release is the rule, as long as the Biden administration refuses to detain people who are awaiting their asylum hearing, and then gives them a notice to appear, given the backlogs of the immigration courts, many people don't appear. And of course, that's again, part of the plan, part of the model that is enriching some of the most dangerous transnational criminal organizations in the world. And finally, for those people like Vice President Harris and others who think this is a problem with just the Northern Triangle in Central America, that is refuted by the fact that if you go to the Rio Grande Valley sector, the Del Rio sector of the Border Patrol, that they have as many as people from 150 different countries detained there. Of course, the big numbers come from Mexico and Central America, but literally, if you have enough money, you can make your way to the southern border and claim asylum and then get placed into the interior of the United States to await your court hearing. And like I said, many people don't show up. And finally, I know there's been some objections raised by the mayors of Washington, D.C. and New York and Chicago over transporting migrants from the border communities where they cross into their cities, each of which I believe continue to hold themselves out as a sanctuary city. But yet, when they begin to feel some of the pressures that our border communities feel every day, with many multiples of the numbers to deal with, they ask, as Mayor Bowser has here in Washington, D.C., for the National Guard because of a crisis they're experiencing. So I remain an optimist. I remain at some point, I think we will have tried everything except the real solution to the problem, and which will break the logjam, which is to deal with the problem of catch and release and the broken asylum system at the border. Then maybe we can deal with things like the Conrad State 30 and Physician Access Reauthorization Act, or the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, or maybe even provide some certainty to the DACA recipients that are anticipating a affirmance of the trial court's decision holding that program 10 years ago started by President Obama when he said he didn't have the authority to do it. He did it anyway, and the district judge agreed with him. He did not have that authority, and I expect that to be enormously disruptive to these young people who've done nothing wrong.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Before recognizing Senator Durbin, just want to remind us all, those in the committee room and those watching from home, that the topic of today's hearing is what I mentioned earlier, why immigrants are critical to bolstering our healthcare workforce. But Senator Cornyn does raise some legitimate concerns, and so for everybody's appreciation, I want to acknowledge that the vast majority of drugs that are smuggled into the United States are through land ports of entry with documented travelers, often United States citizens. In fact, statistics from the department tells us that the Border Patrol has seized 504,000 pounds of drugs. However, only 72,000 pounds were seized by Border Patrol agents. The vast majority make up 14%. The vast majority is actually seized by the Office of Field Operations. And if you know the agency, you'll appreciate the distinction. The vast majority being seized at ports of entry by more than a 7-to-1 ratio. So the key to stopping fentanyl smuggling or other drug smuggling operations is improved screening technology at our border and better utilization of new technologies at that. So I'm happy to welcome or continue the more comprehensive conversations about immigration, the status of our border. But I'd like for us, for purposes of today, to focus on today's topic, and that is our healthcare workforce. And with that, let me recognize Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Chairman Padilla, and I want to echo your remarks. We're here to discuss the shortage of healthcare workers, and yet the conversation so far from the other side of the aisle has not addressed that issue. They want to talk about border security and border safety. They're important issues. I agree with the chairman on that. But I had hoped that we would focus more of our time on actually trying to help deal with a problem that is very real across the United States, including all of our states gathered here today. I just want to note a couple things. Governor Abbott is putting recent entries into the United States, people who have passed the critical fear test, critical concern, into buses and sending them off to cities across the country without any warning. I visited one of those centers last Friday in Chicago at the Salvation Army. And let me spend a second or two thanking the people from the Salvation Army and all the wonderful charities that have stepped up to try to help these people who are in a desperate position. I'm concerned about their fate, as we all should be, but I'm concerned about the governor of Texas and his decision just to dump busloads of these people without warning into communities. We are doing our best, and we're going to deal with them in a humane and American way, but it would be helpful if they didn't become the victims in this, or pawns in this political debate at the national level. I think we ought to be a little more caring for the women and children, families, and individuals who are coming across our border and are here having been judged to be legally qualified to stay until they have a hearing ultimately deciding their fate. I met with them, I sat down, I talked to them. They're in a desperate situation. They've come, many of them, 4 or 5 months traveling to the United States, risking their lives, and many of them suffering things that none of us would want to endure. I think they should be treated in a humane American way, and that means the governor should at least give us warning if he's going to ship them off to cities around our country. Let me say back on the issue of healthcare workers. Some people look at the immigration issue and see murderers and rapists and drug dealers. What we're talking about today is looking at the immigration issue and seeing nurses and doctors and medical professionals and caregivers. They're already here, and we need more of them. I think that is a worthy topic of conversation. I traveled my state in the month of August from the city of Chicago down to the most rural areas of Illinois. The message was consistently the same. Dr. Allure, who is here today, thank you for being here, works at the Marion, Illinois Veterans Hospital, has for 11 years. I went down to Southern Illinois Healthcare, Max Buddy, met with him and talked about what they're facing. They are facing a dramatic shortage in nurses, dramatic shortage in doctors. And what we're trying to do here is to try to find a solution to this. But as long as we're stuck on the issue of law enforcement, we can't even address this. I would just say this. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and boy, I guess I could be proven wrong. But if you can show me a nurse or doctor, immigrant to this country, who is now still in immigrant status, who's committed a serious crime, I'd like to know about it. I haven't heard it. Just the opposite is true. These men and women are coming to the aid of people who desperately need medical care. And to brand them as part of the surge at the border and somehow criminal in some respects, I don't think is fair. I don't think it really addresses the reality of what immigrants bring to this country. Our immigration system is broken. And the reason we haven't changed it is not for lack of effort. Everyone gathered here today has been part of that conversation, but we're a 50-50 Senate and a 50-50 committee within the Senate. And it's difficult to find a bipartisan approach that does ring true to everyone involved in it. We've tried, and I'm afraid we haven't reached it yet, and I hope we do soon. I want to thank the chairman for identifying healthcare workers and healthcare professionals as one possibility. Wouldn't it be something if we did, before the end of the year, a bipartisan bill that brought more doctors and nurses to America where we desperately need them right now? If we put aside all our differences on all the other things and dealt with that, wouldn't it be refreshing to the American people that we get it, that we understand the message we're receiving? The American Hospital Association called the current hospital workforce shortage a national emergency. They project a shortage of 1.1 million nurses by the end of the year. By the end of the year. This is a critical emergency. To say that we have to solve the southern border crisis before we can consider allowing nurses to come to this country and care for Americans is just plain wrong. We need to deal with both, but we can deal with one immediately. The Association of American Medical Colleges estimates the U.S. could see a shortage of 124,000 doctors by 2034. That's for real. I can tell you there are many of them that are here, these physicians already serving our communities and saving lives as we speak. And many of them, unfortunately, due to the lack of available green cards, are forced to remain on temporary visas. And as the chairman has alluded, when their kids reach the age of 21, the protection that allowed them to stay with their parents in the United States evaporates, and they're subject to deportation. How would you like to be a doctor going into surgery knowing that next week your daughter, who you would give anything for, could be subject to deportation? We can fix that. That's what this committee does. This is our jurisdiction. Wouldn't it be great if before the end of the year we had a bipartisan answer to that simple challenge? I know Dr. Allure has addressed this, and he knows it personally, and we do too, from the professionals in this country. So I'm going to conclude by saying there's work we can do. There are things we can achieve, and soon. The bills that have been addressed here, the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, which I co-sponsored with Senator Cornyn, the Conrad State 30 and Physician Access Reauthorization Act, have more than a dozen Republican co-sponsors. You know what that means in terms of the Senate? That means we could hit the magic number of 60 and get this through. Now, there are some on the other side of the aisle, and not alluding to any person who's present here, but there are some on the other side of the aisle who want not one single immigrant to come to this country. I'm not exaggerating. They don't want a single one. They happen to believe that makes us stronger as a nation. I couldn't disagree more. I'm the son of an immigrant and proud of it. I think I'm doing a service to this country, and I hope that I can continue it. And many more just like me, sons and daughters of immigrants and immigrants themselves, want to make America a better and safer place. That's what this hearing is all about.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. We're also joined this morning by Ranking Member of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley. Senator Grassley, did you have an opening statement, or do you want to wait for questions?
I just have questions.
Okay, then let's hear from our witnesses, and we'll hear from Senator Grassley very soon. Now, let me just go through some of the mechanics for the rest of today's hearing. After we introduce and swear in witnesses, they will each have 5 minutes to make their opening remarks. We will then begin with our first round of questions, and each senator will have 5 minutes. So I ask colleagues that we please try to remain within your allotted time. As far as introductions go, let me start with Ms. Peterson. Ms. Sarah Peterson is the founder and principal attorney of SPS Immigration, PLLC, a law firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Sarah's practiced immigration law for more than 15 years. She advises healthcare systems, nonprofit organizations, hospitals, and universities throughout the United States on complex immigration matters relating to the hiring of physicians, researchers, and allied health professionals. Ms. Peterson is an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota Law School and was a 2021-2022 Policy Fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. She also actively participates in the International Medical Graduate Task Force and currently serves as the chair of the IMGT Liaison Committee. Ms. Peterson is also active in the American Immigration Lawyers Association and has been recognized as a leader in her field. We also have Sheriff Martinez with us virtually, and I'll turn to Ranking Member Cornyn to do his introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm advised that Sheriff Martinez's video is not working correctly. He can join us by audio, and I expect he will do that. But Sheriff Benny Martinez has served Brooks County, Texas since 2009. Brooks County is where the Falfurrias checkpoint, which is one of the busiest checkpoints inland from the border, where coyotes, human smugglers, will tell the migrants to get out of the vehicle south of the checkpoint, walk around the checkpoint, and meet them on the north side to be then transported on to their ultimate occasion. The problem is that Brooks County cannot afford to bury all the dead migrants that die in the rough country during hot weather, especially after suffering from exposure, having come from long distances. They can't afford to bury those bodies and have asked the federal government for assistance. Actually, Vice President Harris, when she was a member of the Senate, and I passed a bill which unfortunately still has not seen the money flow to Brooks County for that purpose, but I'm hopeful it will soon. Prior to his service in Brooks County, Sheriff Martinez was a Texas State Trooper from 1979 until his retirement in 2008, retiring at the rank as a sergeant. As a state trooper, he was charged with directing the state's enforcement efforts against illegal drug trafficking, and we're glad to have him here as a witness today, albeit solely by audio. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. I'll now turn to Chairman Durbin for his introduction of Dr. Allure.
I mentioned Dr. Allure a moment ago, but I want to say further, he's been a physician at the Marion Veteran Affairs Medical Center in Marion since 2011. Dr. Allure's hospital serves veterans in Southern Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, and Indiana. We love Marion, and the veterans love it even more. And thank you for 11 years of your life. I might add that Dr. Allure completed his medical degree in India, did his medical training in the United Kingdom and Philadelphia before coming to Illinois. He is caught up in the green card backlog, and I'll have him explain that when he makes his statement. But he now has helped to co-found an organization of similar physicians who want to be part of America's future and want their family to be part of America's future, and they are stymied by the limitations in green cards available to allow that. It's time for us to drop the blinders and realize we need you, Dr. Allure. The veterans of Southern Illinois and Kentucky need you, and people just like you all across the United States. So I'm glad you're here today. We're honored for your presence.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. Now I'll ask our witnesses to please stand and be sworn in. Sheriff, you're on your honor. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony you are about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you very much. You may be seated. The record reflect the witnesses have responded in the affirmative. And now let's proceed to witness testimony. Ms. Peterson, you may begin.
Good morning, Chair Durbin, Chair Padilla, Ranking Member Grassley, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sarah Peterson, and I am an immigration attorney who has helped doctors and their employers navigate our complicated and outdated immigration system for almost 2 decades. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the growing U.S. healthcare emergency and how Congress can effectively advance bipartisan, smart, and targeted reform critical to addressing the existing lack of access to healthcare in the United States. The shortage of doctors in the U.S. is well documented and continues to grow due to a variety of factors, including our aging population, which both increases the number of people seeking care as well as the numbers of doctors ready to retire. In the next decade, more than 2 out of 5 active physicians will be 65 or older. This crisis is only compounded by the increasing COVID burnout by our frontline workers. Further, in the US today, more than 95 million people live in healthcare shortage areas. That's 1/3 of the United States. This number will continue to grow, and by 2034, the US will face a shortage of up to 124,000 doctors, as that sign reflected. This number balloons if every American had equal access to Medicare, and the shortages grow to over 180,000 physicians. Growing up myself in a poor rural community in central Minnesota, I saw firsthand the real effects that the lack of access to healthcare prepared. And for the past 2 decades, I have represented doctors who have heroically stepped up to fill this shortage. International doctors are a critical part of the immediate solution to this crisis, but our outdated physician immigration laws have not seen reform for over 20 years. To be a doctor in the U.S., every international doctor must first complete U.S. medical residency or fellowship training. Over 80% of these doctors train in J-1 status, but then are required to leave the United States and return to their home country for 2 years. While our laws provide a small number of Conrad J-1 waivers for doctors to stay in the U.S. based on their work in underserved communities, each state only receives 38 Conrad J-1 waivers each year, which is simply not enough. Further, our laws should encourage and reward international doctors who work in underserved communities by removing numerical quotas. What follows are concrete steps for Congress to take to address this emergency. First, pass the 2 bipartisan bills pending in this committee. The Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act is a bipartisan bill led by Chairs Durbin and Cornyn. This bill is a direct recognition of the essential role international doctors have played in the national COVID pandemic and provides necessary green card relief to the international doctors who are working on our front lines. Similarly, the Conrad State 30 and Physician Access Reauthorization Act is also a bipartisan bill led by Senators Klobuchar and Collins. Through this bill, Congress would give states the ability to grant Conrad waivers based on need, not an artificial number. Just last year alone, more than half of the states fully exhausted their supply of Conrad J-1 waivers, leaving needy Americans without access to health care. Several more states used almost all of the allotted numbers, and the demand continues to grow each year. Doctors who are not granted a Conrad waiver in most instances must depart the U.S., potentially never to return. For example, the Mayo Clinic each year must prioritize which doctors to sponsor for its limited Conrad J-1 waiver slots, knowing that not all will be selected. Last year, 13 out of the 23 doctors at the Mayo Clinic did not receive a waiver. One doctor, a highly influential oncologist treating breast cancer patients, has been waiting 7 years to obtain a Conrad waiver. While this doctor is lucky enough to qualify for a different work status to continue treating cancer patients in the U.S., most doctors do not qualify. For doctors who are not eligible for an alternative work status, the Mayo Clinic is forced to rescind the offer of employment, and these very doctors are almost always the ones seeking to work in the most neediest underserved communities. This is not right. Second, we should exempt international doctors working in underserved areas from the numerical immigrant and non-immigrant visa quotas that no longer serves United States national interests. Doctors from India and China comprise 1/4 of all international doctors in the U.S., yet face years of delay in getting their green cards. In 2006, I began representing a primary care doctor from India on his green card process based on his work in an underserved community in Missouri, where he remains working today. Just 2 years ago, 13 years after starting this process, he finally received his green card. This doctor provided primary care in an underserved area, yet he still has to wait 13 years. 13 years of wondering what would happen if he lost his job, 13 years of renewing his temporary visa over and over, 13 years of not knowing what to tell his kids about their ability to remain in the U.S. long term. 13 years. Similarly, the numerically limited H-1B program, which remains the primary pathway for most international doctors to work in the U.S., prevents Americans from receiving primary healthcare services. I work with a clinic in southern Texas that has been trying to recruit OBGYN doctors for years to its underserved rural community. The need is so dire that this practice must bus women hours to the nearest healthcare facility for care, which results in delayed care, unnecessary complications, and substantial financial burden to these women and their families. Exempting international doctors who work in underserved communities, both from the green card and the H-1B quota, is a smart, simple solution that will have an immediate and profound impact on the availability of quality healthcare for all Americans. Lack of access to equitable healthcare is a United States emergency, and this bipartisan issue demands immediate bipartisan solutions. Effectuating smart immigration reform, as I have reviewed today, will allow U.S.-trained doctors to help address this country's ongoing shortage of access to basic medical care. I am lucky that despite growing up in my rural community, my community was eventually able to attract and recruit an international doctor who not only treats my family members, but remains in this community after 20 years. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and thank you for your efforts to solve this urgent healthcare crisis by ensuring all Americans have equitable access to the healthcare they deserve.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. We'll now turn to Sheriff Martinez. Sheriff, please proceed with your testimony. We're having some technical difficulties while we try to get Sheriff Martinez back on the line here. If it's okay with you, Senator Cornyn, we'll proceed with Dr. Allure and your opening statement.
Good morning, everybody. Chairman Padilla, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Cornyn, Ranking Member Grassley, and honorable members of the committee. It is an honor to speak with you today on the role of immigrant physicians in the U.S. healthcare system. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Dr. Ram Allure. I'm a physician at Marion Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Illinois. I came to the States in 2007 on a J-1 visa as an exchange visitor from India for my medical residency training. Exchange visitors are generally required to leave the United States and return to their home country after completing their residency, unless they can obtain a waiver of that requirement via commitment to work in an underserved area for 3 years. I chose to work in an underserved area and was lucky enough to obtain a waiver to stay in the States. More specifically, I chose to work with the Veterans Affairs because I thought I could put the training I had received in the US to the best possible use by working for the largest integrated healthcare system and serving the most distinguished group of Americans, the veterans. I also believed that Marion was a great community to raise a family. The Veterans Affairs Hospital at Marion is a cherished institution serving veterans from Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana. Even though I completed my 3-year service commitment in 2014, I continue to work there to this day, as it is a great honor and privilege to serve the nation's heroes, and I have no plans to leave. However, the immigration system could have other plans for me. Why are immigrant physicians important? Well, 1 in 4 physicians in US are immigrants, and immigrant physicians are more likely to serve in the rural and underserved areas than American-born doctors. There is a huge disparity in healthcare access and outcomes in these areas, and immigrant physicians are a critical and important solution to that problem. But due to an outdated immigration system, that solution is at risk. I'm going to share my experience to highlight the problems faced by immigrant physicians today. Doctors like me are on a temporary work visa called H-1B. The H-1B visa only allows us to work in a specified location. Any work outside the specified location is considered a violation of a work permit. During the pandemic, I could not answer numerous calls for reinforcements near or far. Like me, there were an estimated 15,000 physicians that were restricted from being on the front lines providing life-saving services. The H-1B allows me to stay in the country with my family legally because of my valid non-immigrant worker status. If I can't work, we can't stay. This lack of protection with death or disability on the front lines is every temporary visa worker's nightmare. The H-1B visa also makes it difficult for us to travel outside the country. The last time my wife and I saw our aging parents was in 2019. You see, we need a visa stamped in our passports by a consulate in India in order to re-enter the United States. During the pandemic, this process was risky, as consulates were either not open or were taking only few appointments. We just simply could not risk traveling outside when there was a great need here. My petition for permanent residency was approved in 2016 because it was in the national interest based on my work at the VA. However, we still have to wait for an immigrant visa number or a green card to become available, and I've been waiting 6 years, working 11 years, and been in the country for nearly 15 years. My wait could be another decade or more. Until then, my work permit or status needs to be renewed at least every 3 years, which is a huge administrative burden. I've had to renew my status 5 times so far. One hiccup in this long, complicated process, and my whole family will be affected. It is deeply unsettling that my daughter, who was born in India, will age out of legal status when she turns 21. It is hard to say out loud, but this is only 6 short years away. If I do not become a permanent resident by then, she will lose legal status and have to leave. Sadly, Many families do not have the time I have and have gone through painful family separations. Our family is also a victim of poor healthcare access. We could not find mental health services for our daughter in Southern Illinois during the pandemic, and in June 2020, we decided to move to St. Louis area, but I continue to work at Marion VA and commute over 2 hours. During the same summer, my wife was restricted from driving for 6 months. For me, trying to balance home life and caring for patients was burdensome, exhausting, and unnecessary. The backlog in our immigration system and long processing delays were to blame. The time it took to process my wife's visa renewal was a trying time for our family. While we've faced some hardships, they are no worse than many other immigrant stories you've heard here before this committee. And unfortunately, they're not welcoming to the future generations of immigrant doctors. I do not want to give up on affecting change. I want to encourage more international physicians to come in and serve in this beautiful country we call home. So I'm here today as a physician to share with you my on-the-ground perspective. America needs more healthcare workers, and immigrant physicians are a key solution to that. Unfortunately, this outdated system is a problem that will only get worse absent action from Congress, and it will impact the most vulnerable patients who've struggled with access to long before the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Dr. Allure. We're going to try one more time with the sheriff. Are you with us?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee to discuss this important issue. I've been having technical difficulties. I'm up here in Arizona on the conference. I'm Ben Martinez. I'm the Bruce County Sheriff in South Texas. Bruce County Sheriff's Office has 5 deputies and command staff and is responsible for maintaining law and order within a rural region of 943 square miles that encompasses the county seat of Fafurias. Outside of the city of Fafurias, the county consists of private ranch lands. The sandy terrain is mostly vegetated with mesquite trees, shrub oaks, and prickly pearl cactus. The county's population is about 7,400. Bruce County has the checkpoints, one of the busiest checkpoints in the Southwest Corridor, approximately 70 miles north of the U.S.-Mexican border on U.S. 281, or either 69 west. Highway 281 is a major north-south artery from the Rio Grande Valley area that leads to Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas, and other destinations throughout the interior of the United States. United States 281 is part of the Gulf Coast Corridor, which is one of the most active drug and human smuggling corridors in the United States. The Fafurias checkpoint is one of the busiest checkpoints in the Southwest Corridor in regards to undocumented crossers apprehensions and narcotic seizures. Because of Brooks County geographical location, the Border Patrol checkpoint, it has a very own unique challenges. In most cases, smugglers, coyotes drop off undocumented crossers. They are led by the smugglers and made to walk east and west to the Highway 281 to circumvent the checkpoint, moving north through private ranch lands to get picked up on Texas Highway 285 and other roads by other smugglers who will then transport them on the Gulf Coast Corridor to cities north. In other cases, local gang members or others seeking financial gain who live in the county drive their human and drug loads through private property by cutting logs and fences. The sad reality is that most of those who are being led through the brush by the smugglers do not survive the demanding journey. Since 2009, the county has recovered 910 bodies of undocumented crossers. That includes 119 in 2021 and 78 so far this year. We estimate that the recovery is less than half of all those who perish with constituents of health issues. This year, we've had 30 smuggling pursuits, 43 bailouts, 32 stolen vehicles, 5 stolen guns. In addition, we nearly have 200 smuggling cases in Brooks County alone. It's costing us about $4,000 of fuel a week. We also help our landowners by repairing damaged fences, which averages approximately $600 for 100 foot of barbed wire, and into the thousands for net and high fence wiring. The Mexican cartels and the transnational statewide gangs continue to increase the level of organized criminal activity in the Rio Grande Valley and throughout the state. We who live in and near border communities where drug cartels and human smuggling operations are prevalent face additional public safety issues such as felony vehicles, evasions, pseudo police stops, extortion, sexual assaults of illegal aliens. The gangs and cartels have contributed to the deaths of undocumented crossers on the Texas ranches and farms. Apprehensions are still skyrocketing to the Rio Grande Valley Patrol sector. Totals for the month of August were nearly 28,000 encounters, bringing the fiscal year 22 totals over 440,000 encounters. There has been no change in the manpower situation, and the migrant surge and the humanitarian crisis is at a constant pull on their already depleted workforce. Even with a depleted workforce, their local encounters were around 1,400 for the month in Brooks County. While Border Patrol is overwhelmed and the migrant processing duties, they aren't able to carry out their primary function by stopping the entry of contraband and dangerous criminals. Rescues continue to keep us busy with over 305 emergency call-outs. So far this year, and over 1,350 individuals were provided the assistance they so desperately needed. Even with all the technology in place, there continues to be those that succumb to the elements. Good news is that the Favorias Border Patrol is pleased with the results of the new aerostats, which are flying just south of Favorias and are providing great situational awareness, and has also been credited with assisting with over 700 apprehensions. In terms of fire, 32,000 acres of brush fires related to immigration in Brooks County, $6,000 plus in expenses to our fire department, our volunteer fire department, in just immigration calls this year. EMS-related calls from January to August, 82 EMS calls related to breakdowns. 3 immigrations actually were deceased en route to the hospital. Ambulances are being pulled from day-to-day operations to answer calls in remote areas where turnaround time is roughly 4 to 5 hours, leaving our constituents without emergency medical services. This puts a strain on the local health system. The border crisis is a result of not securing the border. When there are no consequences for unlawful entry into the United States, DHS does not adjudicate asylum cases in a timely manner and remove those who don't have valid claims. Transnational criminal organizations will continue to be able to recruit migrants to come up here and overwhelm Border Patrol resources while they run narcotics and criminals around the back end. In closing, I want to thank you for bringing this attention to this very important topic, and I look forward to any questions you have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you for sharing your perspective, your experience. Take it as a reminder to invest in modernizing and fixing the legal migration options to undo the pressures for those who would consider the irregular migration that has led to so many tragedies. The focus of today's hearing, I'll remind us all again, is the role that immigrants play in the healthcare workforce crisis in the United States of America today. And so we're going to begin with our questions. I'll begin with this. One thing we hear often from immigrant healthcare professionals is that they are restricted in where they can practice medicine due to their status. And because these professionals are often tied to a specific employer, it is difficult for them to either move within the United States for better opportunities or to serve areas that might be in more need of their expertise or their services, to move to other healthcare facilities in emergencies like the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Allure, in your testimony, you mentioned that your non-immigrant status as an H-1B visa holder prevented you from being able to go to places like New York during the height of the pandemic, where there was an extreme shortage of doctors. Can you explain the limitations that come along with your status and how updating our immigration laws would improve the nation's public health?
Chairman Padilla, it's a very important question. When the pandemic took over the country, it did it in waves. New York was literally burning with the pandemic, and Southern Illinois was relatively better protected. We could have stepped up and attended to the call. The governor of New York was asking retired physicians to come back into the workforce, the students to graduate early. We could not do it because it is a violation of our work permit to work anywhere else other than what is specified. Going to the endemic problem of physician shortage. We have services that are not available in an area, and you bring a doctor to one employer. If he's not restricted, he could go to multiple hospitals and help those hospitals with the shortage. For example, in our neighborhood, when the pandemic hit us, our neighboring hospitals were losing physicians to quarantine. There was a lot of attrition because a lot of senior physicians did not continue to work. And how would it help United States public health? Primary care is a huge area of shortage all across the country. And again, if a physician who has been in that community for years is still restricted to one employer, he's limited. He could probably go 50 miles across his town and do a satellite clinic maybe one day a week. That would help the community there. A lot of physicians in my community who were immigrants, who did their waiver commitments, stayed there, and after they got their green cards, they've opened practices all across. And improving the primary care that way will address the public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Peterson, I know that you're well aware that the U.S. has designated 8,069 health professional shortage areas across the country for primary care. There's a map behind me that illustrates this. This has resulted in 97 million people who live in the United States in an area that has a shortage of primary care providers. In my home state of California alone, there are 643 health professional shortage areas for primary care, affecting over 7 million Californians. Now, I'm sure many of my colleagues here also represent states with significant health care workforce shortages. If you look at the map, consider that every shade of green on this map represents a shortage area. Ms. Peterson, in your testimony, you recognize that these workforce shortages are due in large part to our increasing and aging population, our seniors. Our aging healthcare workforce and the stress imposed on healthcare workers around the country by the COVID-19 pandemic. So drawing on your experiences, can you explain how immigrant physicians have stepped up to fill these gaps in these underserved areas and how they are part of the solution to end our healthcare workforce shortage emergency?
Thank you, Chair Padilla. Annually, over 1,000 international doctors go to underserved areas and fill this need. But just on the members of the committee today, over 2/3 of your state used all of the Conrad J1 waiver numbers last year. And if we gave states the ability to grant these J1 waivers based on their needs, California, all of the other states, Texas, that would permit doctors like Dr. Allure to go to underserved areas and be rewarded and recognized for their work, and to ensure that Americans were receiving the health care that they need by opening it up and giving states the ability to really give these waivers. And the Conrad Reauthorization Act does just that.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn.
Ms. Peterson, let me just ask as a preliminary question. Well, let me make a brief statement before I do that. I personally believe that legal immigration has been one of the great secrets to our success as a country. By one account, since 1783 to 2019, we've had 96 million people legally immigrate to the United States, and we're better off for it. Illegal immigration is another matter, in my view, and as you know, many people showing up at the border these days are claiming asylum. But as an immigration attorney, can you help us with a figure here? How many claimants of asylum who actually appear in front of an immigration judge get that claim validated?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cornyn. Immigration law is like physicians. We subspecialize, and I specialize in high-skilled physician immigration. So I don't have that number, but I'm happy to provide it to you.
Well, I think it's somewhere around 85 to 90% do not qualify. But the problem is because of the huge backlogs and the fact that the Biden administration releases people into the interior of the United States. Some of them show up in Chicago. Some of them, they go to all four corners of the United States. And Sheriff, if you're still with us, I'm referring to your written statement here when you say that there are no consequences for unlawfully entering the United States. Could you explain what you mean by that?
From the
We can hear you now.
it's the fact that, okay, good. They're not prosecuting cases. We're not following the rule of law. When there's no consequences, they're going to keep coming. And that's the issue. You know, here at the checkpoint, they just stopped the truck tractor with 115 in the trailer, 115 occupants, which, you know, you can see the same scenario that occurred in San Antonio with those 53. Prior to that, 12 months ago, we had 73 in a trailer, and the federal guidelines were not met. So that particular driver, we picked them up and prosecuted them ourselves. You know, we're kind of educating the criminals as to what they can get away with. And I know this is about health care. I get that. But until we secure the border, until we shut that border down and start peeling off, I know that they talk about immigration. The issue is that not everyone is going to come in and stay in stash houses like they do here in the Rio Grande Valley sector, you know, where you have 200 people in a stash house. That's definitely a health crisis, okay? When we pick up bodies, we test them for COVID. We have 20% of them tested for COVID, and those bodies are walking in with a group. So the rest of them get away. We got 20% of COVID. Guess what? That group is going into the interior of the United States. Until we secure this border, Brooks County is a Democratic county. I'm a Democratic sheriff. And it's just absurd how we're trying to mix things together here. For instance, we have sexual assault cases, females in the brush, okay? So what I do, I work with immigration attorneys. I sign off on their waiver, and they stay in the United States, okay? The fact is, we're not going to be able to prosecute anyone because they're not going to actually say, okay, this is the person that did it. But we work along closely with Border Patrol and their intel group, you know, and talking about narcotics and being seized in the port of entry, it's simple. Those are actual narcotics that you can count. And I know this because when I did my covert operations with DEA and Customs back then, we used to cross, and they're still doing it. They're using the river. Those are amounts that you can't count on. You don't count those. It's just like the getaways. You don't know how many getaways are fleeing. I don't understand how we're mixing this whole operation into immigration. I have a friend of mine that's been waiting for 20 years to get his citizenship. 20 years. You know what? All this is about policy. Work on policy. You know, reach over the aisle and work on policy. Fix it, and we won't have these freaking conversations. This is horrible. What I've just been listening is horrible. I don't get this. I'm a Democrat, and here we are going through all these issues, these green card issues. The same thing. Green card. Why does it take 20 years to become a citizen of the United States? Why does it take so long to get a green card? You know, we're talking about health issues. We don't have a hospital in Brooks County. We have 3 different hospitals that Border Patrol work with and we work with. They're out of Kingsville, which is 30 minutes away, in Corpus Christi. We cannot mix this together. We have to decipher this. We have to reach over the aisle and get this thing fixed. I mean, it's frustrating for all the sheriffs along the Southwest corridor, and I think y'all understand how frustrated I am because I've been dealing with this since 2009. And I'm yet to have any Democrat come to my office, sit down so I can show them all the books I got of all the dead bodies, all the parents, all the family members that come to my office crying because they lost their loved ones 10 years ago. I'm sorry. I think I went off a little bit. This is frustrating. It just bothers me what I'm listening to. It's not, we need to divide this issue. We need to separate. I get it. You know, we're all immigrants. I get that. So was I. So my grandparents. But it's the right way to do it. There's a right way to do it, and I think everyone ought to just get together and put some common sense into this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. And it sounds like an invitation I'd be happy to accept to work together to reinvest in the very departments and agencies that are charged with considering and processing these applications, regardless of what the outcome would be. We've got to maintain due process. I think we share the desire to significantly reduce the backlogs that have only grown for years and years in all categories of immigrant applications. So coming back to the topic at hand for today's hearing, the role of immigrants in the healthcare workforce, I now recognize Senator Durbin for questions.
I just want to say that I thought the sheriff's comments were impassioned and genuine and reflected the reality of the almost impossible job we've given him on our border with so many others. Our border is under siege. There's no question about it. When I sat down in Chicago last Friday with a family that started out from Venezuela on May 15th, father, 32 years old, mother, 22, a 5-year-old daughter, and a 1-year-old daughter, and they set out to walk to America. It took them months to finally reach the Texas border. And in the meantime, the worst possible things happened to them. They were beaten and they were robbed and they were abandoned in a Panamanian jungle for 9 nights. And the man said, I thought we were going to die. And yet they pressed on. They were desperate to come to the United States because he said, I couldn't feed my family in Venezuela. And I think that desperation brought on by poverty or violence or climate change is the reality of the moment. The question is, can we construct a system for legal immigration that says to this doctor and to many others like him, you are welcome in America. We need you in America. We thank you for being here in America, and we want you to have your family with you and to have confidence that they can realize the American dream too. And says to workers like this man from Venezuela, yes, you can come in, but you're going to be legally recognized when you come in and what you're going to do here. Perhaps you're going to work on that dairy farm in northern Illinois that's going to close down if they don't get foreign workers, or the orchard in southern Illinois where they desperately need foreign workers. It is our failure in this committee and in this Congress to establish legal immigration that has led to this desperate plunge by these people to come forward and risk their lives to do it, to cross our border. They are not here for, the ones I met, were not here for any illegal purpose whatsoever. They just wanted a chance to work. How many times I heard that over and over again. Dr. Allure, you work in the Marion Veterans Hospital. Are there other foreign-trained physicians in that hospital?
Almost every department in Marion Veterans Affairs Medical Center has immigrant doctors. I don't speak for the VA, I'm speaking about my experience. We looked at the whole region, the southern Illinois, when we initially met our congressman in 2017 to give him an idea of the importance of immigrant doctors. No department in southern Illinois, right from Mount Vernon till Metropolis, would function without immigrant doctors.
That point is so important for members on both sides of the aisle. We love our veterans. You're right. They are our nation's heroes. We promised to stand by them when they came home. And yet the men and women who do that, we treat so badly when it comes to their devotion to our country and their yearning to be part of its future. Make you go through all the traps you have to go through year after year after year, uncertain as to whether, as you mentioned, you're going to miss one little step and be judged ineligible for any future service to our country. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to your family, and it's not fair to the veterans you serve. I will tell you, we know, others may not hear, Marion is in a rural part of Illinois, a limited population area of Illinois. Attracting doctors there is harder than it is in Chicago or St. Louis, the veterans facilities. And those of you who serve there, we especially are grateful. But I think we need to take into consideration just what kind of contributions you make. Ms. Peterson, this is maybe out of your area, but I want to put in a plug for one thing that before my time runs out here. I am embracing foreign-trained immigrant nurses and doctors and medical professionals, and I think they are essential to our future. But at the same time, we need to have more homegrown medical professionals, nurses and doctors in the United States. Can you comment on efforts that are underway, if you know of any, along those lines?
Yeah, it's a little bit out of my scope, Chairman Durbin, but what I can add is that you're right. This is a multifaceted approach, and we do need to continue to grow and educate U.S.-born physicians and nurses. But what we're talking about today is an immediate solution to fix our urgent healthcare crisis in the United States.
Spot on. That's exactly right. And I'll mention one other thing. In the American Rescue Plan, which some in the room did not vote for and some did, we put $1 billion into scholarships and loan forgiveness for the National Health Service Corps. And the National Health Service Corps focuses on underserved areas. These are physicians we hope will be attracted to those areas, but we need to expand the graduation rates of our medical professionals. The boomers insist on it, and I happen to be close to that age group. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. Couldn't agree more. And I think to tackle that also pressing issue, it's both tackling the affordability of medical school education and the capacity of medical schools across the country to keep up with our growing and aging population. Next for questions is Senator Grassley.
I don't think I have to repeat what Senator Cornyn has said about the problems, the political problems of solving this issue. They could go away fast if the border was secured. And, 3 3/10 million people already in the 18 months of this administration crossing the border. And then we have the absurd statements by Vice President Harris, quote unquote, the border is secured. I think I've heard Secretary Mayorkas say the same thing. So, Sheriff, I know that you also personally witnessed this impact at the open border. I guess you've already made a strong statement in regard to that. So my first question is, you've previously attributed migrant deaths to, quote, the false compassion of open border, end of quote. I think that's a superb description of what we're seeing at the southern border. I'd like to have you elaborate on that phrase.
Yes, sir. What's occurring here is just they're being taken advantage of, and they're being left to die, and it's not a good death because they know they're dying. It's not and what I mean by that, it's not a quick death and that they're just going to die as you would in a crash. But we get lots of 911 calls when you hear the last desperate voice on him saying that tell my mom I love them, tell my sister, my wife, children, whatever the case might be. We just picked up a 15-year-old that we recovered from the brush. And that not only, Brooks County has numerous deaths, but now the whole Southwest corridor is experiencing it. I got bodies from Maverick County, Texas, in my morgue. I have a morgue myself in Brooks County that we house other bodies that are recovered from the different counties because it's a surge. And until we secure that border, until that is shut down completely, then we can start working on everything else. And I understand the health issues. I understand what they're trying to say, but it's policy. The policy says, come over. And that's the rhetoric. That's the narrative that's occurring right now. The narrative is come over. Well, guess what? We need to do it correctly. This is why I said the rule of law. It's got to be done correctly. I'm a Democrat, but it's just pathetic how things are going currently along the border and on the Southwest corridor.
You've talked about the role played by transnational criminal organizations in migrant deaths that we've seen at the border. I'd like to have you tell me, how common is it in your county to come across migrants who are in need of medical care and attention?
I did visit with the secretary twice, sir. He was down in my county, and I visited with him twice, and I told him what we needed. We needed a simple triage so we can get the medical assistance that they need quickly. And I haven't heard anything back from them. So we need that. And I know what we need in Brooks County. They're just not listening to some of the sheriffs, including me, as to what's needed. If we just, and this is just for a quick fix. We don't have a hospital in Brooks County. Everything has got to get flown out to different hospitals that can manage these type of issues. But a triage will definitely help to immediate assistance. Border Patrol, they're gentlemen that are EMT. They apply IVs, but by the time they apply that IV, sometimes it's just too late, and they succumb to the heat or to the cold. I mean, we picked up 5 bodies at one time. At one time, when we had the freeze back several years ago, they're all stuck together. I mean, that's just not right.
My last question, could you describe how transnational criminal organizations handle migrants who get sick or experience health problems? And more broadly, to what extent can you comment on the impact that migrants in need of care have on the local health care infrastructure in your area?
Well, in my area, in comments to that, in my area, we don't have that because we don't have a hospital. But what it does take is the fact that our ambulance services that have to go out to the ranch lands, pick them up, and then transport them, that leaves our community open to other issues that we have. Our county is elderly. They over 60, 65, 70s probably meaning, so they need the medical assistance locally. But when we're out there treating them, then that becomes an issue. Now, as far as the transnational gang members, they just leave them there. If someone just happens to get hurt, they get sick, they're gone. They're there on their own. They fend for themselves. Now, thanks to Border Patrol, we have a lot of placards out there, probably over 200 placards and put in different areas. We have beacons. Everything that can be done is being done in Brooks County to save lives. I work closely with the consulates. There's 4 consulates I work closely with, and down in the McAllen office, and we give them a lot of literature to forward down south so they can understand what's going to happen to them if they come into the United States, if they come into Brooks, the dangers that might be happening. So everything has been out there. The outreach is there. Where they're the fact is, transnational gang members, they just don't care. It's all money's for them.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. And colleagues, I'd like to share just on the topic and the concerns raised by Senator Grassley and the sheriff. I was just down at the southern border in California during our August work period. And what I saw offered by the state of California and partner non-governmental organizations together with the Border Patrol was nothing short of incredible. The University of California, San Diego has actually provided medical screening and stabilization for newly arrived asylum seekers to the San Diego County since December of 2018. So this isn't a short-term pilot project. This has been going on for a while. The program screens for conditions that would threaten the health of either the individual or the community. Medical screening for conditions of public health significance is done on all asylum seekers at the time of arrival, from scabies to monkeypox. And I'm happy to report that there has not been a single case of monkeypox found during the screening of all the asylum seekers. In fact, asylum seekers they have found are generally healthy. For example, in August of 2022, just last month, of the 5,492 guests seen at the shelter hosted by Jewish Family Services, only 20 were sent to an emergency room. That's 0.4%. This is improved from our previous low rates from December 2018 to March of 2020, when less than 1% of arrivals needed to be seen in an emergency room. So I recognize that the California numbers may not be exactly representative of the whole border, but the less than 1% statistic hardly sounds like an overwhelming drain on public health resources. Aside from the numbers, I just offer this model of federal agencies working in partnership with states and NGOs to improve border safety and treat asylum seekers with dignity. With that, let me recognize Senator Hirono for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a time in 2013 when this committee spent around 2 weeks marking up a comprehensive immigration bill that addressed some critical needs in both the legal and illegal immigration situation, both of which systems are broken. I hope that at some point we can get back to that kind of a perspective, and clearly we have some bipartisan bills that will help. Sheriff Martinez, I hear your frustration. Clearly, we need to address the issues in the border that deals with another committee's jurisdiction. Also, but today I would like to focus on the dire need in our country for healthcare workers. If there's one thing that the pandemic showed was the importance of the essential workers, of whom many of them, of course, are doctors, our nurses, our healthcare workers, stretched thin to the brink of exhaustion during the 2 years of the pandemic and still not over. So in fact, just recently in Hawaii, our governor signed an emergency rule authorizing out-of-state nurses to temporarily practice in Hawaii without obtaining a license from the state. And we have a shortage of some 732 physicians. 732 physicians affecting our state pretty much right now. So yes, thank you, Ms. Peterson, for focusing us on the immediacy of the challenges. What kind of steps have medical facilities had to take because of the shortages in the healthcare workforce that you can share with us?
Thank you, Senator Hirona. The immigration process is complicated. It involves multiple different federal agencies, a lot of paper, a lot of time, and a lot of money. I have so many physician clients who have a job offer from a healthcare facility that wants to hire the physician, and they can't because we don't have enough numbers, it's not the right time. The list goes on. And so today, the Conrad reauthorization bill provides so many reliefs to our system for my clients, for doctors like Dr. Allure, to be able to recruit and retain physicians.
That is a bipartisan bill, right?
Absolutely bipartisan.
Does it lift the cap for the Conrad 30 program?
It does not. What it does is it looks at the states that use all of their 30 waiver numbers, and if they use them, then each year there's an add-on so that the states can really control and supply the J-1 waivers that they need for their application.
Would you support lifting the cap or increasing the cap substantially?
The demand is so great, and as I said, 2/3 of the states that the senators on this committee represent fill every year. And so I do think that the Conrad bill provides a smart solution to be able to give states back the power to get the numbers that they need.
Well, how much longer do you think, for both of you, can our healthcare system, and that includes the VA system, where there are major shortages, I know, of doctors and nurses, how long can these systems continue to use the kind of quick patches, such as a governor issuing an emergency order, for a problem that needs long-term investment and policy changes? Dr. Allure?
Senator Hirano, thank you for the question. It's a very important question. I don't speak for the VA, but this is my experience. The shortage is already an emergency. When we try to, from a rural area, when we try to get a veteran out to a hospital that can provide them services, often there are no beds because they're all working at reduced capacity because they don't have nurses. Often there are no doctors for 2 hours or so. So we are already in an emergency. I know the COVID pandemic has given a stress test of sorts to the healthcare system here, and we haven't recovered from that. Combined to that, the rural areas, which have more aging population and aging doctors, are projected to face even more shortage than the urban areas. And it has to be fixed now. There's really no time.
Ms. Peterson, the nurses in Minnesota have gone on strike because there aren't enough nurses to safely provide care for the patients. So are we going to see more of those kinds of actions by nurses and other healthcare providers who are just totally up to here with what is being asked of them?
I think we'll see that. I also think that the stress falls on patients. Just a week ago, I was told that one of my family members has to wait over 2 months to see a cardiologist, and I'm not alone. This experience was just backed up by a survey that looked at 15 major metropolitan communities, DC included, that says the average wait time for a physician is 30 days. And that depends on where you live and the specialty that you're seeking care from. So in addition to the stress on the doctors and nurses, It's impacting us, it's impacting my family, and it's impacting your families. It's urgent, and we need to address it through smart immigration reform.
Ms. Peterson, you mentioned your support for 2 bipartisan bills that we could push, and I would ask the chairman to and the ranking member to focus our minds on getting those bills, bipartisan bills, passed this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I don't even know if I'll have time to ask you all any questions, but I do want to talk a little bit about how we resolve a series of crises that I think we have. There's no question we have a healthcare crisis. I was just down at a hospital, an institution you all would recognize, one of the most admired healthcare institutions in the United States, down in North Carolina. They have 80 beds that they can't make available because they don't have the nursing staff. We all know the pyramid. You got to have nurses in order to staff a room. We don't have them. Capacity that's lost because we don't have healthcare workers. We have a food security crisis. Now, getting away from healthcare, there's an agriculture group meeting with my staff right now. I'll guarantee you the first issue, the top issue that they have are resources to actually work in meat processing facilities, picking delicate fruits, doing the kinds of things that we need labor for. So we have a food security crisis. We have a housing crisis. The cost of labor has gone up astronomically. The length of time it takes to build a house has gone up. The cost of affordable housing has gone up and been made less affordable because we don't have labor inputs there. But we also, contrary to what President Harris said this week, we have a border crisis. The border is not secure, and 80% of the people that are crossing the border do not have a valid asylum claim. That is not, in my opinion, that's bared out by facts of the adjudication process that someone goes through. When they claim credible fear, they go through the process, they're adjudicated as not having a credible claim. So how do we solve all these crises? We recognize we have a problem at the border, we have labor input problems, and we solve the problem as a group. It will not be done in isolation. The bipartisan bills that Senator Hirono talked about, I agree with on its face. They don't have a prayer of getting passed unless we look at this more holistically. If we take a look, Ms. Peterson, at just even trying to process, in North Carolina, we use up our caps. I track it very closely. We have dozens of cases of trying to get nurses here on work visas, and it's frustrating. I know it's got to be frustrating for the outside. Imagine how frustrating it is for a Senate office having to go through that just to make sure that we can get as many beds open as possible. But we keep talking around the strategy that is necessary to solve the problem. Those bills are not going to get passed. They're not even going to get a chance to be voted on the floor. Likely not, unless we do the work to come up with a comprehensive solution that recognizes if we reduce future flows, we're going to have more resources to process visas. Just imagine if 2/3 of the future flows went away, how many other resources could be freed up to focus on legal immigration, guest worker programs, the kinds of things that you're looking at. And I know your head's probably about to explode going, yeah, but that's not my problem. It is our problem, and we have to solve it. And there are some simple solutions for solving it, and we have come so damn close so many times only to not get into the end zone. We have to recognize that there are people on both sides of the aisle who are willing to work together to address these worker shortages, but not a single one of us, or at least me, I won't speak for my colleagues, will unless we fix the underlying problem with border security and 2 million plus people coming across the border illegally every year. We can do that with asylum reform. We could reduce the future flows overnight. We could shift resources to value-added processes like addressing these worker shortages that go across every sector. And if we will take the time to do that, stop talking past each other, recognize that all of us are going to have to make some difficult political decisions, we can fix this. This is not rocket science. This is something we know what the fixes are. And this committee has a role to play in it. Other committees have a role to play in it, but Congress has a responsibility to do this. And I hope that before the end of this Congress, we can stop talking past each other, deal with the asylum issues that are, I think, probably the primary concern that Senator Cornyn and I have, And we're ready to address these empirically driven shortages in critical areas, not only healthcare, but across the spectrum of sectors in the United States. And I, for one, hope that we get it done before the end of this Congress. I do recognize your problem. We feel it every day in North Carolina, and I'm going to do everything I can to help be a part of the solution. Other people need to step up. Thank you. I'll yield back my second.
Thank you, Senator Smith. I'm going to take that second just to thank you, because I think the public does deserve to hear that you have been engaged on this issue and in our conversations, and we're striving to, we have yet to find the common ground that enough of us around here can vote to have a final work product approved by the Senate as a body that would be meaningful and helpful. The frustration that only mildly share publicly is, in some conversations, we've gone in the direction of, well, like if you're trying to be too global, too comprehensive, it's all going to fall apart. Yet at the same time, I hear, well, this is too narrow, it's not big and robust enough, so we can't do this. So finding that balance is what we're striving for. Obviously, we haven't found it yet, not yet, but I'm not giving up. I appreciate you not giving up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would just say, just for you all, if we don't get this thing done before the end of this Congress, my guess is we're 5 years away from getting another opportunity, and I hope people pay attention to that.
Mr. Chairman, will you allow me just 30 seconds?
Sure, Senator Cornyn.
I think we can talk this thing for the next 20 years and never reach a conclusion. Or we could do what Senator Tillis and I have asked the chairman of the Judiciary Committee to do, the committee with jurisdiction over immigration matters, is schedule a markup. Bring a bill before the committee, have an amendment process, which is part of that process, and see if we can come up with a majority of senators who would find a bill that they would support. If we just continue to talk about this, we're never going to get this resolved. We've been talking about DACA for 10 years and never gotten it resolved. So we have the tools available to us, but the only person who can convene that markup would be the chairman of the committee. And so I hope our Democratic colleagues would support us in that effort. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much for taking on this issue. And this is something that, and I appreciated Senator Tillis, Senator Cornyn, your support for a number of these immigration measures, including the Conrad 30 bill that Senator Collins and I introduced. We now have 26 bipartisan co-sponsors, including Senator Ernst, Senator Rosen on this committee, the two of you, as well as Senators Durbin and Coons and Blumenthal. And I thank our witnesses. I really I don't think our economy can withstand it if we don't move. My state has the lowest, as Ms. Peterson well knows, lowest unemployment rate in the country. We don't have enough workers all the way down the line, and some combination, and I've been here, your point, Senator Cornyn, when we have been able to pass an immigration bill that would have fixed a lot of this. We got it through the Senate with bipartisan support, comprehensive immigration bill, and then unfortunately, it did not pass in the House. I've seen a bill pass in the House and not here. And I'm hoping that third time is a charm, and we simply cannot wait. As pointed out by Senator Durbin, national shortage of as many as 124,000 physicians. In Minneapolis, there's one doctor for every 304 people. And, you know, we're the land of 10,000 lakes as well as 10,000 medical clinics, as you know. With Mayo, so many University of Minnesota that we're so proud of. But in rural northwestern Minnesota, there's only one doctor for every 686 people. That is why I took on Kent Conrad's bill many, many years ago to be able to allow for more doctors that are studying at our great medical clinics, medical schools throughout the country to be able to stay for their residency and the like. And I would like to expand that The legislation reauthorizes and expands the Conrad 30 program that has brought more than 15,000 doctors to underserved areas, include rural and urban, in the last 15 years. Ms. Peterson, by the way, thank you for graduating with degrees from the University of Minnesota, working, I understand, at the law school. Where were you born in Minnesota?
Wisconsin, but lived in Minnesota my entire life.
The Vikings and Packers game?
I did.
Okay, all right. Well, you can imagine I was happy with the outcome. All right, my mom came from Wisconsin, so all is good. So could you talk about how, in your experience, what role do immigrant doctors who have been trained in the U.S. Play in providing essential medical care to rural and underserved communities?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I mean, I think a statistic that's really telling is that 28% of these international doctors who go into underserved areas stay there well past their 5 years, as compared to 11% of U.S. doctors. And I think that's telling because we need to expand our programs to continue to reward and recognize international doctors who are going into these communities, like Dr. Allure. They're building lives. They are staying there long term. A doctor who came to my small town, he's been there for over 20 years. He's built his life there. And so we have a shortage. It's documented, and we have the vehicle to immediately address it, which is your bill, Senator Klobuchar.
Okay, can you talk about why reauthorizing the program would be, in your words, a win-win?
It gives states the ability to control the doctors that they can place. It also encourages and rewards physicians like Dr. Allure to work in underserved areas by helping them get over the H-1B numerical cap, which this year alone, we had over 480,000 people apply for 85,000 numbers. So it also rewards physicians on the green card side of things for going into underserved communities. And these are three very critical components to ensuring that Americans are getting the access to healthcare they need.
I note that recently the United Kingdom introduced a healthcare visa program that fast tracks visas for healthcare workers, not just doctors. And Canada, which is very close to our borders, also offers an expedited pathway to permanent residency for doctors. I note that in Great Britain, they have a conservative prime minister. They had one with Boris Johnson. They have one with Liz Truss, yet they're moving ahead on this. Could you talk about why this is a problem for the U.S., if you want to chime in, Doctor, if we lose, we don't keep people here, we're losing them to other countries?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for your leadership. Great question. My personal experience, I've shared my burdens here. If I was to talk to a doctor who is hoping to come here or who's planning to stay after training, I would tell him it's fantastic to work here. My experience working with the veterans is very rewarding, very satisfying. But if they listen to my family's troubles and if they have to talk to their families and then say, a doctor has been working here for 11 years, he's been in the country for 15 years, this is the prime of his youth when he can do a lot, should we go here? And I'll leave it to your imagination, what would their families say? As a physician, this is fantastic. As a family, the way the system is currently, how would it help? I want to extend this to say what would happen if people get green cards. I have an example of a pediatrician from my community who finished his waiver in 2008, went on to build 6 practices, employ 18 providers, employ 48 employees, and serve pediatrics in my community. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just to make clear, our bill updates, modernizes the program by allowing states to bring in more doctors, and then additional incentives for doctors to continue serving in an underserved area for up to 5 years. And I think that also would make a tremendous difference. So I just, again, want to thank both of you. Want to thank Senator Padilla and Senator Cornyn for holding this hearing. We can't wait, whether we do a bill that's focused on parts of this. I know that Senator Rounds valiantly tried to do a bill I was part of the group during the Trump administration, and we had a number of Republicans on board, and then we were, in my mind, gut punched by the administration. yet with many Republicans having been willing to support it here. This is our chance. We've got to move quickly. And thank you for bringing this Padilla, Mr. Padilla, Senator Padilla, to our attention, and then Ms. Peterson, as well as Dr. Allure. Thank you very much. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I know clock is ticking. We have votes open, but there are a couple more questions I want to raise and have responses for the record. I'll try to be brief. The lack of access to health care in rural communities is a serious emergency. According to data tracked by the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, 182 rural hospitals have closed since 2005, leaving residents in those areas no options but to forego receiving health care or to travel long distances to see a doctor. Dr. Allure, in your testimony, you mentioned that the Veterans Affairs Hospital where you work is located in Marion, Illinois, a town with a population of about 17,000. You also mentioned that your hospital serves veterans from a number of states, including Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana. Can you briefly describe what healthcare disparities you've witnessed in your work and how those disparities impact individuals living in rural areas in particular?
Thank you, Chairman Padilla. Our veterans come from 2 hours, 2.5 hours away, going past emergency rooms and hospitals to receive care at the VA. It's such a cherished institution. Once we get the veterans, we take care of what we can take care of there. It's a small hospital. The shortage in the community glares at us once we try to transfer veterans to places they need. VA spares no effort, energy, or expense in getting care to the veterans. And like I alluded before, hospitals are closed. Whoever is in the community, whoever is coming to a hospital for a problem is at an advanced stage because they don't have access to primary care, and that's a huge problem. The pediatrician I was talking about, who is established a huge practice there, he is having to recruit out of his expertise so that he can provide care. So he's recruiting psychologists, he's recruiting dental assistants so that that shortage is compensated. The disparities are projected to even get worse as aging physicians retire. So the outcomes are already poor. We have to act now so that we can arrest that decline and secure the rural areas.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a slightly more personal question, Dr. Allure. You've mentioned that moving a substantial distance away from work in order to put your daughter's needs first. You shared that in the testimony you submitted. You also mentioned the trials and tribulations that you and your wife have faced navigating our complex immigration laws. But yet, despite all that, you remain committed and steadfast in your passion for your work, the work that you do serving our nation's veterans. I'd like to thank you again for the work that you do in your service. And I just want to hear from you, what would obtaining a green card mean for you and your family?
Thank you, Chairman Padilla. One word I would say is stability. We've been working in the community, we've been living in the community, but we are not really part of the community. We don't belong there because we're still temporary immigrant workers. Stability to my family, to my children, especially my daughter who will age out if I don't get a green card in 6 years. Stability to my patients. Travel is a problem being on a visa. If I leave the country and if I can't come in, there is a gap. That has been the case with many immigrant physicians in our organization. Freedom from simple day-to-day restrictions like not able to drive. Right now, there is a physician in East Tennessee, a rural country. A gastroenterologist is not able to drive because of his visa problem. He's decided to relocate. His children and wife are already gone. He says he cannot take calls because he can't go to the hospital if there is a bleeder in the hospital. There is a liver transplant program director in Iowa City right now who is not seeing patients because his immigration process is screwed up. He's not doing anything since Monday. His patients are waiting. All these restrictions and problems we face are actually, they reflect on the patients, they reflect on the communities. One day of work I can't do is care delayed for many patients. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn, any final questions?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any more questions. I do want to thank all of our witnesses for being here. I have no doubt that the problems that you've identified are real, and we have it within our power to fix them if we can find the political will to do so. But just as I believe the testimony of Ms. Peterson and Dr. Allure are real and valid concerns, I believe the concerns expressed by Sheriff Martinez are equally real and valid. And the message that I have tried to communicate to Chairman Durbin and my friend Senator Padilla is that there will be no solution to the issues you've highlighted, as much as I would like for us to be able to do that, until we find a solution to what's happening at the border now. What's happening at the border is simply unsustainable. I talked about the drug deaths associated and distribution of those drugs by criminal gangs across the United States. It's completely intolerable. And the burden should not fall to the states like mine or other border states like Senator Padilla's to deal with it. This is a federal responsibility. But the only way we can do that is if we actually do our job here, which is not just to talk about it, it's actually to do something. And that doing something means marking up legislation, trying to build consensus, and then get it to the president's desk. And we can't do that as long as all we're doing is talking. So thank you very much for being here. I hope that we can make some progress here. And thanks to Sheriff Martinez for joining us remotely and dealing with the huge challenges that border communities in Texas deal with 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. There's one last brief question I'd like to ask, and then we'll proceed with a closing statement. But after listening to all the testimony today, one thing has been clear, it was frankly clear before today's hearing, our outdated immigration laws are not working, period. But in addition to the other impacts of a broken immigration system, we attempted to focus today on how it's exacerbating the crisis that is our healthcare workforce shortage. So, Ms. Peterson, can you just comment briefly on how, if Congress does not act swiftly to remedy this outdated system, what are the implications for the health of Americans across the country?
Thank you, Chair Padilla. I'd like to go on record by saying I think we can do both. I think we can deal with our border crisis and deal with the urgent healthcare shortage crisis in the United States, because if we don't do both immediately, the numbers will continue to grow. At the beginning, we were talking about the 124,000 shortages of doctors over the next several years. It's only going to continue to grow. And what that translates into is Americans are going to continue to have longer wait times, have worse patient outcomes in terms of complications, more financial burdens. It will continue to compound. And it's not just the rural and the underserved anymore. It's all of us in the urban areas. It's your families and mine. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually think that's a great note to begin to conclude on, because we can do both, we must do both, but to utilize one situation, policy, issue, or challenge to keep us from making progress, bipartisan progress, on a clear crisis is unconscionable. I want to, before concluding, allow a number of statements that have been submitted into the record, and I'll read who they are from. We have received statements for the record from the American Association of International Healthcare Recruitment, the American College of Physicians, the American Hospital Association, American Medical Association, the Association of American Medical Colleges, the Cato Institute, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, the Healthcare Leadership Council, National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, National Immigration Law Center, Southern Illinois Healthcare, Upwardly Global, and World Education Services. So without objection, these statements will be included, and the record will close 1 week from today. Now, as this hearing concludes, I want to thank our witnesses again for joining us today, as well as Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Cornyn, and our fellow committee members. As I mentioned at the outset, today's hearing was not just about fixing our immigration system or about providing support to the healthcare workers who need it. It's about tackling the crisis of our healthcare workforce shortage. It's about saving lives. It was my hope today that in order to address an issue as important as saving American lives, that we could stand united to reform our system. That wasn't the spirit that all the members of the committee showed up with. So I want to make sure I make one thing clear before I close this hearing. The border has nothing, I repeat, nothing to do with the fact that we will need to hire up to 124,000 doctors by 2034 to fill current workforce gaps. We have a healthcare workforce shortage that is affecting millions of Americans. And there are productive solutions to address this. 2 bipartisan bills, which Ms. Peterson raised today, each of which have 25 bipartisan co-sponsors. And I'll note, I know he just left, and this is meant respectfully, Senator Cornyn is the lead on one of them. But instead of utilizing our time today to focus on meaningful change, we were met with repeatedly a misleading narrative. It's a frustrating pattern among many of my Republican colleagues. Now, I too was at the border just a few weeks ago. On the itinerary that day was a Border Patrol ride-along, in addition to visits to ports of entry and detention facilities. So let me be clear. Our border is secure. Let me also be clear about this point. People presenting themselves at the border seeking asylum is a legal right that they have. But the reality is it's the process that's broken, and it is in need of reform. But many of my Republican colleagues are only interested in fear-mongering. That's what I keep hearing. And if the only solution that they offer is to completely close the border, it's a non-starter. I was interested in hearing the ranking member speak today about working in good faith. We've been able to do so on a number of other issues. And he's right. We do need Republicans to work in good faith to help millions of Americans and to reform our immigration system. But working in good faith is acknowledging that we can do 2 things at once. Good faith is coming to the table to engage with experts and to respect and recognize data from our departments and agencies. Good faith is not showing up at a national workforce shortage hearing and focusing on statistics about gun violence in Chicago. Good faith is seeing a complex issue facing our healthcare workforce and coming together to find common ground that will save lives or to advance solutions when we've already found that common ground, solutions that enjoy bipartisan support, and not find excuses to not move those forward. But when Republican colleagues actually want to talk about solutions to improve our immigration system so that we uphold our nation's value and our economy, then absolutely, I am more than ready and willing to listen. And I can say the same for Chairman Durbin. Now that starts with being honest about cruel and misguided policies like Title 42 and MPP that are unlawful and have only created more bottlenecks and put more people in danger. As I said earlier in the hearing, we need to improve the legal migration pathways to undo the pressure on irregular migration. Legal migration pathways used to be a bipartisan issue, and they weren't conflated with border reform once upon a time. And we have bipartisan solutions just sitting here in front of us waiting to be passed. So it's a shame for this nation. It's a disservice, frankly, and especially those in underserved areas when it comes to healthcare, that Republicans won't let us move the needle forward, even on solutions they support. For the 95 million Americans living in an area with a shortage of healthcare professionals, including those living in Sheriff Martinez's county, we cannot afford to wait. It's not just health, it's lives that are at stake. Because every day that this workforce gap exists is another day that a loved one has to travel hundreds of miles for a doctor's appointment, or a friend has to wait too long for a life-saving preventative screening if they can get to a healthcare provider at all. What we've heard today leaves no doubt. We cannot address this shortage without reforming our immigration laws. There are thousands of highly qualified healthcare professionals already living in the United States who can join our healthcare workforce. As we heard from Dr. Allure, immigrant physicians are eager to serve the rural and underserved areas of our country that so desperately need care. And as Ms. Peterson pointed out, Congress can make reforms to allow more physicians to not just come to the United States, but remain in the United States after they complete their training. Congress can make more visas available for healthcare workers by recapturing unused visas in years past. And Congress can make exceptions to numerical caps to specifically address healthcare workforce shortages. For the sake of our nation's health, we must act swiftly to pass laws that will provide much needed reforms to our broken immigration system and bring care to communities in need. So I want to thank again all of our witnesses for your participation here today, all my colleagues who attended and participated here today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.